Thomas Mitchell had been working as a royal security guard at Kensington Palace for 12 years. At 45 years old, he had seen 3 generations of royals come and go through the palace corridors. His weathered face bore the marks of a man who had dedicated his life to service, first in the military and then protecting the royal family. Every morning, Thomas would arrive at the palace gates precisely at 6 o'clock. His uniform was always pressed to perfection, his shoes polished until they gleamed, and his posture straight as an arrow. The other guards respected him not just for his experience but for his unwavering dedication to duty. Thomas had worked through difficult times. He had been there during family celebrations and tragedies, through public scandals and private moments of joy. He had learned to read the moods of the royal family members, understanding when to maintain extra distance and when a warm smile might be appreciated. Prince George, now 10 years old, had always been different from what Thomas expected. The young prince was not the spoiled, demanding child that many people imagined royal children to be. Instead, George was observant, polite, and surprisingly thoughtful for his age. Thomas had watched the boy grow from a toddler taking his first wobbly steps in the palace gardens to a confident young person who seemed to understand the weight of his future responsibilities. The prince had a routine that Thomas had memorized over the years. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon after his private tutoring sessions, George would walk through the East Wing corridor to reach the library. Thomas was always stationed there during these times, standing at attention as the young prince passed by. What struck Thomas most about Prince George was his awareness of the people around him. Unlike many children of privilege, George seemed to notice everyone, from the highest-ranking officials to the cleaning staff. He would nod politely to the guards, say good morning to the gardeners, and always thank the kitchen staff when they prepared his meals. Thomas had a daughter named Emma who was about the same age as Prince George. Emma had been born with a hearing impairment, and Thomas had learned sign language to communicate with her better. It had been a challenging journey for their family, but it had also brought them closer together. Emma was bright, creative, and full of life, despite the obstacles she faced. The other guards knew about Thomas's daughter because he would sometimes share stories about her achievements at school or her latest art project. He carried her photo in his wallet and would light up whenever he talked about her progress in her special education program. Recently, Thomas had been feeling the weight of his years of service more heavily. The long hours standing in the same position were taking a toll on his aging body. His back ached constantly and his knees creaked when he walked. More than the physical discomfort, though, Thomas felt a growing distance between his work life and his family life. He missed too many of Emma's school events because of his duties. He had missed her last 3 birthday parties because they fell on days when security was heightened due to royal events. Emma never complained, but Thomas could see the disappointment in her eyes when he had to cancel their plans again and again. The royal family was kind to their staff, but Thomas sometimes felt invisible in their presence. He was part of the furniture, a necessary but unnoticed element of their daily lives. After 12 years of faithful service, he wondered if anyone would even remember his name if he left tomorrow. Prince George's Tuesday afternoon walk through the East Wing had become one of the highlights of Thomas's week. Not because anything exciting happened, but because the young prince always acknowledged him with a respectful nod. It was a small gesture, but it meant something to Thomas in his increasingly routine days. On this particular Tuesday in October, Thomas noticed that Prince George seemed different. The boy walked slower than usual, and his usual confident demeanor seemed subdued. As he approached Thomas's position, the prince stopped and looked directly at him, as if he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. Thomas maintained his professional stance, but he couldn't help wondering what was on the young prince's mind. In all his years of service, no royal had ever stopped to have a conversation with him while he was on duty. The protocol was clear. Guards were to be present but not intrusive, helpful but not presumptuous. Prince George stood there for a moment longer, then seemed to make a decision. He walked past Thomas toward the library, but something in his expression suggested that this interaction was far from over. Thomas had no idea that this brief moment would set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. As the prince disappeared around the corner, Thomas resumed his vigilant watch over the corridor. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the polished marble floor. He had 4 more hours left in his shift. Then he could go home to Emma and help her with her homework. Little did Thomas know that Prince George had been observing him much more carefully than he realized. The young prince had noticed things that others had missed, and his 10-year-old mind was working on a plan that would demonstrate wisdom far beyond his years. The palace continued its quiet rhythm around Thomas as he stood guard, unaware that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors, staff members went about their duties, and the late afternoon light gradually faded as evening approached. Thomas thought about Emma waiting for him at home, probably working on her art project for the school exhibition next week. He smiled slightly at the thought of her concentrated expression as she carefully chose which colors to use. These small moments of joy sustained him through the long hours of duty. As his shift neared its end, Thomas had no idea that tomorrow would bring changes he never could have imagined, all because a 10-year-old prince had been paying attention in ways that would soon become clear. The next morning brought an unusual request that would puzzle Thomas for hours to come. As he reported for his regular duty station, his supervisor, Captain Reynolds, approached him with a slightly confused expression. "Thomas, I've received an unusual request from Prince George's private secretary," Captain Reynolds said, adjusting his cap. "The prince has asked specifically for you to be assigned to library duty today, instead of your usual corridor post." Thomas raised his eyebrows in surprise. In 12 years of service, no member of the royal family had ever made a specific request for his assignment. Guards were typically rotated based on security needs and scheduling requirements, not personal preferences. "Did they say why, sir?" Thomas asked, maintaining his professional tone despite his curiosity. Captain Reynolds shook his head. "No explanation given. Just that Prince George requested your presence in the library area during his afternoon study session. Strange request, but we accommodate the family's wishes, as you know." Thomas nodded and made his way to the library wing of the palace. The library was one of his favorite places to be stationed when the opportunity arose. The room was magnificent, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with centuries-old volumes, comfortable reading chairs positioned near tall windows, and an atmosphere of quiet dignity that seemed to encourage contemplation. As he took his position near the library entrance, Thomas wondered what could have prompted such an unusual request. He had always been professional in his interactions with Prince George, never overstepping boundaries or attempting to engage in conversation beyond what was appropriate for his role. At precisely 2 o'clock, Prince George entered the library carrying his school materials. Instead of proceeding directly to his usual study table, the young prince paused near Thomas and did something completely unexpected. He smiled warmly and, to Thomas's amazement, raised his hand and signed "Good afternoon" in British Sign Language. Thomas was so shocked that he nearly broke his professional composure. The sign was perfectly executed, clear and deliberate. For a moment, he forgot where he was and almost responded. But his years of training kept him in position. However, his eyes widened with recognition and surprise. Prince George noticed Thomas's reaction and smiled even more broadly. The young prince then walked to his study table and began his afternoon lessons with his private tutor, Mr. Davidson. But every so often, George would glance toward Thomas with a knowing look that suggested this interaction was just the beginning. During the 2-hour study session, Thomas's mind raced with questions. How had Prince George learned sign language? More importantly, how did the prince know that Thomas would understand it? Thomas had never used sign language at work, and he was certain that none of his colleagues knew about Emma's hearing impairment or his ability to sign. As the session concluded, Prince George packed his materials slowly, giving Thomas several more small signs. "Thank you," he signed discreetly, followed by, "See you tomorrow." Each gesture was accompanied by that same warm, knowing smile that suggested the prince was very pleased with himself. Thomas maintained his professional demeanor until his shift ended, but his mind was spinning with confusion and curiosity. As he walked to his car that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about the young prince's unexpected knowledge and the deliberate way he had used it. When Thomas arrived home, Emma was waiting for him at the kitchen table, her homework spread out before her. As always, she signed "Welcome home, Dad," as soon as she saw him. Thomas hugged her and sat down beside her, still processing the day's unusual events. "Emma, sweetheart," Thomas signed to his daughter. Have you ever met anyone from the royal family? Emma looked puzzled and shook her head. No, Dad, why would I meet them? Did something happen at work today? Thomas considered how to explain without revealing too much about his duties. I just had an interesting interaction today, and I was wondering if there was a connection I didn't know about. Emma studied her father's face with the perceptive eyes of a child who had learned to read facial expressions and body language more carefully than most people. Someone surprised you today, didn't they? She signed with a smile. Thomas nodded, amazed as always by his daughter's intuitive understanding. Yes, someone did surprise me, but I can't figure out how or why. That evening, Thomas found himself researching Prince George online, something he had never done before despite working so closely with the royal family. He learned about the prince's education, his interests, and his public appearances, but nothing explained how the young royal would have learned sign language or why he would use it specifically with Thomas. The mystery deepened when Thomas discovered that there was no public record of Prince George learning sign language. None of the articles mentioned any connection to the deaf or hearing-impaired community. It seemed impossible that a 10-year-old prince would have learned this skill without it being mentioned somewhere. As Thomas helped Emma with her homework that night, he noticed her working on a special project about famous people who had overcome challenges. Emma had chosen to write about Helen Keller, and her research had led her to learn more about different ways people communicate when they can't hear or speak. Dad, Emma signed during their conversation, did you know that some people learn sign language not because they have to, but because they want to understand and help others better? Thomas looked at his daughter with new appreciation for her wisdom. That's very insightful, Emma. Why did you think of that? Because today at school, we learned that kindness sometimes means learning about other people's worlds, even when yours is different, Emma replied with her hands moving gracefully through the signs. As Thomas tucked Emma into bed that night, he began to suspect that Prince George's actions weren't random. The young prince seemed to be demonstrating exactly the kind of thoughtful kindness that Emma had described. But how had George learned about Thomas's personal life? And what was the prince planning to do next? Thomas fell asleep that night with more questions than answers, but with a growing sense that his ordinary life was about to become extraordinary in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Tomorrow would bring more surprises, and Thomas was beginning to realize that Prince George had been observing much more than anyone had given him credit for. The young prince's silent action was just the beginning of something much larger, something that would challenge Thomas's understanding of duty, respect, and the true meaning of service. The following day brought even more surprises that would deepen the mystery surrounding Prince George's unexpected knowledge and intentions. Thomas arrived at work still puzzled by the previous day's events, but he was about to discover that the young prince's plan was far more elaborate than he had imagined. Captain Reynolds approached Thomas again with another unusual assignment request. This time, however, the captain's expression showed more than confusion. It showed genuine bewilderment. Thomas, I've received another specific request for your services, but this time it's even more unusual, Captain Reynolds said, scratching his head. Prince George has requested that you accompany him and his tutor to the palace gardens for an outdoor lesson today. In 12 years, I've never had a royal specifically request a guard by name for 2 consecutive days. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. Outdoor assignments were typically given to the younger, more physically capable guards, and they were usually rotated to prevent any single guard from becoming too familiar with the royals' routines. This request was breaking several unwritten protocols. Did the prince's secretary provide any explanation this time? Thomas asked. Captain Reynolds shook his head. None whatsoever. Just that Prince George insisted on having you specifically for today's garden lesson. The request came directly from Prince William's office, so it's been approved at the highest level. As Thomas made his way to the designated meeting point in the palace gardens, he noticed several other staff members looking at him with curiosity. Word had apparently spread about the unusual requests, and people were beginning to wonder what made Thomas special enough to warrant such specific attention from the young prince. The palace gardens were particularly beautiful that autumn morning. The trees displayed brilliant colors of red, gold, and orange, and the carefully maintained pathways wound through centuries of royal landscaping. Thomas had always appreciated the gardens from a distance, but he had rarely been assigned to outdoor duty there. Prince George arrived promptly at 10 o'clock with his tutor, Mr. Davidson, who carried a notebook and what appeared to be art supplies. The prince looked directly at Thomas upon arrival and signed, "Good morning," with the same perfect execution as the day before. This time, however, Prince George didn't stop there. As they walked along the garden path, the prince began what could only be described as a silent conversation with Thomas. Using discreet hand gestures that wouldn't be obvious to his tutor, George began asking Thomas questions in sign language. "What is your daughter's name?" The prince signed while appearing to listen to Mr. Davidson's lesson about the historical significance of the garden's design. Thomas was so surprised by the directness of the question that he almost forgot to maintain his professional composure. After a moment of internal debate about whether responding would be appropriate, he decided that ignoring a direct question from a member of the royal family would be more inappropriate than answering. "Emma," Thomas signed back, keeping his hands low and his movement minimal. Prince George's face lit up with genuine joy at receiving an answer. "How old is Emma?" he continued. 10, like you," Thomas replied, beginning to feel more comfortable with this unusual communication. "Does she like art?" George asked next, gesturing toward the art supplies his tutor was carrying. Thomas nodded, and Prince George's smile grew even wider. The young prince then did something that made Thomas's heart skip a beat. George reached into his school bag and pulled out a small, carefully wrapped package. "This is for Emma," Prince George signed, handing the package to Thomas. "I made it myself." Thomas accepted the gift with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the generosity and thoughtfulness of the gesture. He had no idea what was inside, but the fact that Prince George had thought about Emma enough to create something for her moved Thomas deeply. Mr. Davidson, who had been focused on explaining the history of a particular rose garden, suddenly noticed the exchange. "Your Highness, what are you giving to Officer Mitchell?" he asked with curiosity rather than concern. Prince George looked at his tutor with the confidence of someone who had planned for this moment. "I made a small gift for his daughter, Mr. Davidson. She's the same age as me, and I thought she might enjoy it." Mr. Davidson looked surprised but pleased. "That's very thoughtful of you, Your Highness. Officer Mitchell must have mentioned his daughter at some point." Thomas quickly shook his head. "Actually, sir, I've never discussed my personal life while on duty. I'm not sure how Prince George learned about Emma." This statement caused both Mr. Davidson and Prince George to look at Thomas with interest, but for different reasons. Mr. Davidson seemed puzzled by the mystery, while Prince George appeared pleased that his detective work had been acknowledged. "Your Highness," Mr. Davidson asked gently, "how did you learn about Officer Mitchell's daughter?" Prince George looked thoughtful for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I've been observing, Mr. Davidson. Good leaders need to know about the people who serve them, don't they? You taught me that understanding others is important for making good decisions." The wisdom in the 10-year-old's response impressed both adults. Thomas realized that Prince George had been applying lessons about leadership and observation in ways that his tutor probably never intended. As they continued their walk through the gardens, Prince George kept up his silent conversation with Thomas, asking about Emma's interests, her school, and her favorite activities. With each question, Thomas became more amazed by the young prince's genuine interest in his daughter's life. "She's very artistic," Thomas found himself signing in response to one of George's questions. "She loves to draw and paint." "I thought so," Prince George replied with satisfaction. "That's why I made what I made for her." When the garden lesson concluded, Prince George approached Thomas with one final sign before leaving. "Tomorrow, can you bring a photo of Emma? I'd like to see her artwork sometime." Thomas nodded, still processing the extraordinary morning he had experienced. As Prince George walked away with his tutor, Thomas carefully tucked the small gift into his uniform pocket, eager to get home and share this incredible experience with Emma. That evening, as Thomas handed Emma the carefully wrapped package, he tried to explain the day's events without revealing too much about royal protocols or his growing confusion about Prince George's motivations. Emma unwrapped the gift with excitement and gasped when she saw what was inside. Prince George had created a small hand-painted bookmark featuring a beautiful butterfly design with Emma's name written in elegant calligraphy below it. "Dad," Emma signed with tears in her eyes, "this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me." How did he know butterflies are my favorite? Thomas stared at his daughter in amazement. He had never mentioned Emma's love of butterflies to anyone at work, which meant Prince George's knowledge was even more mysterious than he had realized. The young prince wasn't just observant. He was conducting a careful investigation into Thomas's life, and his attention to detail was remarkable. Thomas spent the entire evening wondering how Prince George could have known about Emma's love for butterflies. The mystery was becoming more intriguing with each passing day, and Thomas found himself looking forward to work in a way he hadn't felt in years. Emma couldn't stop admiring her new bookmark. She held it carefully, tracing the butterfly's delicate painted wings with her finger. "Dad," she signed, "will you tell the prince thank you from me? This is so special." Thomas promised he would, though he wasn't entirely sure how to do so within the boundaries of royal protocol. Personal exchanges between staff and royals were discouraged, but Prince George seemed to be creating his own rules for their interactions. The next morning brought yet another surprise. Captain Reynolds approached Thomas with what appeared to be a formal letter bearing the royal seal. "Thomas, this is unprecedented," Captain Reynolds said, holding the letter with obvious confusion. "I've received a formal request from Prince William himself, asking that you be given special assignment flexibility this week. The letter doesn't specify what this means, but it's signed by the Prince of Wales personally." Thomas took the letter and read it carefully. The language was formal, but the message was clear. Thomas was to be made available for whatever assignments Prince George's education team deemed appropriate, with full support from the highest levels of the royal household. "Sir, I don't understand what's happening," Thomas admitted to his superior. "I've done nothing special to warrant this kind of attention." Captain Reynolds studied Thomas's face carefully. "Perhaps that's exactly why you're getting this attention, Thomas. In my experience, the royal family notices people who do their jobs well without seeking recognition. Maybe Prince George has been watching and appreciating your dedication." When Thomas reported to his assignment that morning, he was directed to a part of the palace he had rarely visited, Prince George's private study room. This was an intimate space where the young prince received one-on-one tutoring in subjects that required special attention. Prince George was already there when Thomas arrived, seated at a small desk with various books and papers spread before him. The prince looked up as Thomas entered and immediately began signing. "Good morning, Thomas," Prince George signed, then added something that made Thomas's breath catch. "I hope Emma liked her bookmark." "I spent a lot of time making it perfect." Thomas nodded and signed back. "She loves it very much, Your Highness. She asked me to thank you personally." Prince George beamed with satisfaction, then gestured for Thomas to come closer to his desk. On the surface, Thomas could see several pieces of paper with what appeared to be research notes written in the prince's careful handwriting. "Thomas," Prince George said aloud, "I need to tell you something important. I've been learning about you and Emma because I wanted to understand what it's like for people who work here and have families to take care of." Thomas was surprised by the prince's directness and maturity. "Your Highness, may I ask how you learned so much about my personal life?" Prince George smiled with the pride of someone who had successfully solved a complex puzzle. "I started by observing. I noticed that you sometimes looked sad when you thought no one was watching. You would check your phone during breaks and sometimes you'd smile at photos. I wondered what made you happy and what made you worried." The prince continued his explanation with the enthusiasm of a young detective sharing his methods. "I asked Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen about you. She said you were a dedicated worker but that you sometimes seemed tired. She mentioned that you had a daughter who was special and that you worked very hard to take care of her." Thomas realized that Prince George had been conducting a systematic investigation, talking to various palace staff members to piece together information about his life. "Then I asked Mr. Peterson, the gardener, because he's worked here for 20 years and knows everyone. He told me that your daughter was hearing impaired and that you had learned sign language to communicate with her better. He said you were very proud of her artistic abilities." Prince George pulled out a small notebook filled with his careful observations. "I've been learning sign language for 3 weeks now. My tutor found me a teacher who comes twice a week. I told my parents I wanted to learn it as part of my education about communicating with different people." Thomas was overwhelmed by the effort the young prince had put into understanding his situation. "Your Highness, why did you go to all this trouble?" Prince George's expression became more serious, showing a maturity that seemed beyond his 10 years. "Because I've been thinking about what it means to be a future king. My father always tells me that leadership means understanding and caring about the people you serve. I realized I didn't really know anything about the people who work so hard to take care of our family. The prince showed Thomas several pages in his notebook, where he had written observations about different palace staff members, their names, their families, their challenges, and their contributions. I learned that Mrs. Johnson in housekeeping has arthritis but never complains about her work. I found out that Mr. Williams in security has a son serving in the military overseas. I discovered that you have missed many important events with Emma because of your duties here. Thomas felt his eyes welling up with tears as he realized the depth of Prince George's compassion and understanding. Thomas, Prince George continued, I also learned that Emma has a school art exhibition next Friday, and that you've already had to miss her last 3 important school events because of work commitments. Thomas nodded sadly. Yes, Your Highness. It's one of the difficulties of this job. The royal schedule doesn't always align with personal obligations. Prince George reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an official-looking document. That's why I asked my father to help me arrange something special. This is a formal request for you to have next Friday afternoon off, with full pay so you can attend Emma's art exhibition. Thomas stared at the document in disbelief. It was signed by Prince William and bore the official seal of the Prince of Wales. Your Highness, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous, but I can't accept special treatment that other guards don't receive. Prince George had clearly anticipated this response. It's not special treatment, Thomas. It's recognition of your years of faithful service and an acknowledgement that good employees deserve to have important family moments. My father agreed that this was the right thing to do. Thomas felt overwhelmed by the young prince's thoughtfulness and the practical way he had solved a problem that Thomas had been struggling with for years. There's one more thing, Prince George added with excitement. I'd like Emma to know that someone appreciates her father's dedication to duty. Would it be appropriate for me to write her a letter, telling her how proud she should be of you? Thomas was speechless. In 12 years of service, he had never imagined that a member of the royal family would take such a personal interest in his life or show such consideration for his family's needs. Prince George's silent action was turning into something much more significant than Thomas had ever anticipated. That evening, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with Emma, trying to find the right words to explain the extraordinary events of the past few days. The official document granting him time off for Emma's art exhibition lay before them, and Emma kept staring at it with wide eyes. Dad, Emma signed. A real prince did this for us? For me? Thomas nodded, still processing the magnitude of Prince George's gesture. Yes, sweetheart. Prince George learned about your art exhibition and wanted to make sure I could be there to support you. Emma's hands moved quickly as her excitement grew. But why would he care about me? He doesn't even know me. That's what makes this so special. Emma. Prince George cares because he understands that families are important, and that sometimes work can keep parents from being with their children during important moments. As Thomas helped Emma with her homework that night, he found himself reflecting on the profound impact of Prince George's actions. In just a few days, the young prince had transformed Thomas's perspective on his job, his value as a person, and the meaning of true leadership. The next morning at work, Thomas noticed that other staff members were looking at him with curiosity and respect. Word had spread throughout the palace about Prince George's special interest in Thomas, and people were beginning to understand that something significant was happening. Captain Reynolds approached Thomas with another update. Thomas, I've been instructed to inform you that Prince George has requested your presence for his morning constitutional walk through the palace grounds. Apparently, he has something important to discuss with you. When Thomas met Prince George for their walk, the young prince was carrying a sealed envelope and had an expression of serious purpose on his face. Thomas, Prince George began as they walked along the garden path, I've written the letter for Emma that I mentioned yesterday, but before I give it to you, I need to ask you something important. Thomas felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Of course, Your Highness. Prince George stopped walking and turned to face Thomas directly. Are you happy working here, Thomas? I mean really happy, not just professionally satisfied. The question caught Thomas off guard. In 12 years of service, no one had ever asked him about his personal happiness in relation to his work. Your Highness, I'm honored to serve the royal family. It's been a privilege to work here. Prince George studied Thomas's face with the perceptive eyes of someone much older than his 10 years. That's not what I asked, Thomas. I asked if you're happy. I've been watching you, and sometimes you look like you're somewhere else in your mind. Sometimes you look sad when you think no one is watching. Thomas felt his professional facade cracking under the weight of the prince's genuine concern and surprising insight. Your Highness, happiness isn't really something I've thought much about in relation to work. I've focused on doing my duty well and providing for my family. But what if you could do both? Prince George asked. What if you could serve others and still have time for the things that make you truly happy? Thomas wasn't sure how to respond to such a profound question from a child. But Prince George continued before he could answer. I've been learning about different kinds of service, Thomas. My tutors have taught me about people who serve their communities in many different ways. Some serve by protecting others, like you do. Some serve by teaching, like teachers do. Some serve by helping people who have challenges, like people who work with children who are deaf or have other special needs. Thomas began to understand where the conversation was leading, and his heart started beating faster. Prince George handed Thomas the sealed envelope. This letter for Emma explains how proud she should be of you, but it also contains something else. It's an invitation. Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the letter. An invitation to what, Your Highness? There's a school in London that specializes in education for hearing-impaired children. They're looking for a security coordinator who understands the unique needs of their students and families. The position would allow you to use your security experience while also being part of a community that understands Emma's world. Thomas stared at the prince in amazement. How do you know about such things? Prince George smiled with satisfaction. I asked my father to help me research opportunities that might be perfect for someone with your skills and your family situation. He made some calls and found out about this position. The school would love to interview someone with your experience and personal understanding of their community. Thomas felt overwhelmed by the thoroughness of Prince George's planning and the generosity of his gesture. Your Highness, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly thoughtful, but I've been loyal to the royal family for 12 years. And your loyalty has been noticed and appreciated, Prince George replied seriously. But true leadership means wanting what's best for the people who serve you, even if it means they might serve somewhere else where they can be happier and more fulfilled. The young prince paused and looked directly into Thomas's eyes. Thomas, I want you to know that if you choose to stay here, you'll always be welcomed and valued. But I also want you to know that if you choose to explore this opportunity, you'll have the full support and recommendation of my family. Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized the depth of Prince George's understanding and compassion. Your Highness, why have you done all this for me? I'm just one guard among many. Prince George's response demonstrated wisdom far beyond his years. Because every person matters, Thomas. Because true leadership means seeing people as individuals with dreams and challenges, not just as workers who perform functions. Because I want to be the kind of future king who makes people's lives better, not just someone who is served by others. As they completed their walk and returned to the palace, Thomas carried the letter with trembling hands, knowing that his life was about to change in ways he had never imagined possible. That evening, when Thomas shared Prince George's letter with Emma, they both cried tears of joy as they read the prince's words of encouragement and discovered the amazing opportunity he had helped create for their family. Emma looked up at her father with shining eyes and signed, Dad, I think we just met a real prince, not just someone who was born to be one. The weekend that followed was filled with difficult decisions and emotional conversations. Thomas and Emma spent hours discussing the incredible opportunity that Prince George had presented to them. The letter from the specialized school was everything the young prince had promised, a position that would utilize Thomas's security expertise while immersing him in a community that understood Emma's needs. Emma was particularly excited about the prospect of her father working in an environment where sign language was commonplace and where her hearing impairment would be seen as just another way of experiencing the world, rather than as a limitation. Dad, Emma signed over breakfast on Sunday morning. Imagine working somewhere where everyone understands that there are different ways to communicate. You wouldn't have to explain about me to anyone because they would already understand. Thomas nodded, but he was also wrestling with feelings of loyalty and uncertainty. 12 years at Kensington Palace had become more than just a job. It was his identity, his routine, and his sense of purpose. Monday morning arrived with another surprise. Captain Reynolds approached Thomas with a message that would add yet another layer of complexity to his decision. "Thomas, I've been asked to inform you that Prince William would like to speak with you personally this afternoon. This is highly unusual, as you can imagine." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. A personal meeting with the Prince of Wales was unprecedented for someone at his level in the security hierarchy. At precisely 2 o'clock, Thomas found himself in Prince William's private office, a warm and surprisingly informal space filled with family photos and personal mementos. Prince William gestured for Thomas to sit, immediately putting him at ease with his approachable demeanor. "Thomas, I understand that my son has been quite busy this week." Prince William began with a smile. "George has told me about his project to learn more about the people who work with our family. And I must say, I'm impressed with his initiative and his insights." Thomas wasn't sure how to respond, so he simply nodded respectfully. Prince William continued, "George has explained to me your situation with Emma, your dedication to duty despite personal sacrifices, and his belief that there might be an opportunity that would better serve both your professional skills and your family needs." "Yes, sir. Your son has been incredibly thoughtful and generous with his time and attention. George has also told me," Prince William said, leaning forward slightly, "that he believes true leadership means wanting the best for the people who serve you, even if it means they might find their best opportunities elsewhere. I have to say I'm proud of his understanding of this principle." Prince William stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. "Thomas, I want you to know that whatever decision you make regarding this opportunity, you have our complete support. George has shown me your service record and it's exemplary, but more than that, he's shown me that you're a man of character, who has made significant personal sacrifices for duty." The Prince of Wales turned back to face Thomas. "If you choose to explore this new opportunity, you'll leave here with the highest possible recommendations and our gratitude for your years of faithful service. If you choose to stay, you'll be welcomed as someone we value even more deeply, because we understand what keeping you means to your family." Thomas felt overwhelmed by the kindness and understanding being shown by both father and son. "Sir, I'm deeply moved by Prince George's concern for my family, and I'm honored by your support. But I also feel a strong sense of loyalty to this position and to your family." Prince William smiled warmly. "Thomas, let me share something that George said to me that I think you should hear. He said, 'Dad, if we really care about Thomas, we should want him to be in the place where he can use his talents best and where his family can thrive. If we try to keep him here just because he's good at his job, aren't we being selfish?'" The wisdom of Prince George's words struck Thomas deeply. The 10-year-old had articulated something that Thomas had been struggling to understand himself. "George also said," Prince William continued, "that he hopes someday to be the kind of leader who helps people find their best path, even when it's not the easiest path for the leader." Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized the profound impact that Prince George's attention and care had already had on his life, regardless of what decision he made about his future. That evening, Thomas attended Emma's art exhibition at her school. Thanks to Prince George's intervention, he was able to be there as Emma proudly displayed her butterfly paintings and demonstrated some of her artistic techniques to visitors. As Thomas watched his daughter glow with pride and confidence, he realized something important. Emma thrived in environments where her way of communicating was understood and valued. Perhaps he would thrive in a similar environment, where his understanding of that world would be seen as an asset, rather than just a personal detail. After the exhibition, as Thomas and Emma walked home together, Emma stopped suddenly and looked at her father with serious eyes. "Dad," she signed, "I think the prince helped us understand something important." "What's that, sweetheart?" "That there are different ways to serve people, and that sometimes the best way to help others is to be in the place where you can use all of your gifts, not just some of them." Thomas looked at his wise 10-year-old daughter and realized that both she and Prince George had understood something that he was just beginning to grasp. True service meant bringing all of yourself to help others, not just fulfilling obligations while leaving parts of yourself unused. That night, Thomas made his decision. He would accept the interview at the specialized school, not because he wanted to leave his current position, but because Prince George had helped him understand that his experiences with Emma and his security expertise could serve a community that needed both. More importantly, Prince George had shown him that real leadership meant recognizing and nurturing the whole person, not just the worker. This 10-year-old prince had demonstrated a level of compassion and wisdom that would stay with Thomas for the rest of his life. Thomas realized that Prince George's silent action had been much more than a kind gesture. It had been a masterclass in leadership, empathy, and the true meaning of service to others. 2 weeks later, Thomas stood in Captain Reynolds' office holding his letter of resignation with mixed emotions. The interview at the specialized school had gone better than he could have hoped, and they had offered him the position of security coordinator with enthusiasm, particularly impressed by his personal understanding of the hearing-impaired community and his extensive professional experience. Captain Reynolds read the resignation letter carefully, then looked up at Thomas with a mixture of sadness and respect. "Thomas, in 25 years of managing security personnel, I've never seen anything like what happened with you and Prince George. That young man has shown remarkable insight and compassion." Thomas nodded, still amazed by the entire experience. "Sir, I want you to know that this decision wasn't easy. This has been my home for 12 years, and I've been proud to serve here." "Thomas," Captain Reynolds said seriously, "what Prince George did for you has had an impact on the entire security staff. Everyone has been talking about how he took the time to really see and understand one of us as a complete person, not just as someone who performs a job." The captain paused and looked thoughtful. "You know, Thomas, your situation has prompted some discussions at the highest levels about how we can better support our staff members who have families with special needs. Prince George's actions have opened everyone's eyes to things we hadn't considered before." On Thomas's final day of work, Prince George requested one last private meeting. They met in the same garden where they had shared their first sign language conversation, and both the prince and Thomas seemed to understand the significance of the moment. "Thomas," Prince George said, speaking aloud but also signing his words, "I want to thank you for teaching me something very important." Thomas looked surprised. "Your Highness, I think you're the one who's been teaching me." Prince George smiled with the wisdom that had become characteristic of their conversations. "You taught me that good leadership requires more than just giving orders or making decisions. It requires really seeing people and understanding what they need to be their best selves." The young prince pulled a small wrapped gift from his pocket. "This is for you, Thomas. It's not as artistic as the bookmark I made for Emma, but I hope you'll keep it as a reminder of what we've learned together." Thomas unwrapped the gift to find a small, hand-carved wooden plaque with words burned into its surface. "True service means bringing all of yourself to help others flourish." "Your Highness," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "I will treasure this always. But more than that, I will remember the lesson you've taught me about what real leadership looks like." Prince George's expression became serious. "Thomas, I hope that someday, when I'm older and have more responsibilities, I'll remember what you've shown me about dedication, sacrifice, and love for family. I hope I'll always remember to see the whole person, not just their function." Thomas knelt down to Prince George's level, breaking protocol one final time. "Your Highness, you're going to be an extraordinary leader someday, not because of your title, but because of your heart." 3 months later, Thomas was settling into his new role at the specialized school with remarkable success. His security expertise was valuable, but his personal understanding of the challenges faced by hearing-impaired students and their families made him an invaluable bridge between the school community and the outside world. Emma had never been happier. She had started attending weekend art classes at the school where her father worked, and she was thriving in an environment where her way of communicating was completely normal and accepted. One afternoon, Thomas received an unexpected visitor at the school. Prince George, accompanied by his protection officer and a member of his education team, arrived for what was described as an educational visit to learn about specialized teaching methods, but Thomas suspected that Prince George's real purpose was to see the results of the opportunity he had helped create. During the visit, Prince George met Emma for the first time. The two 10-year-olds communicated easily in sign language, with Prince George's skills having improved considerably over the months since Thomas had left the palace. "Emma," Prince George signed, "your father talks about you all the time when we correspond. He says you're creating amazing artwork." Emma beamed with pride and showed Prince George some of her recent butterfly paintings. Your Highness, she signed. Thank you for helping my father find a place where he can use all of his skills. Prince George looked thoughtful. Emma, your father helped me understand something important about what it means to serve others well. He taught me that caring about people means caring about all parts of their lives, not just the parts that affect work. As the visit concluded, Prince George asked to speak with Thomas privately one final time. Thomas, the prince said, seeing you here, seeing Emma's happiness, and seeing how you're using your experience to help this entire community, this makes me understand what I was trying to learn when I first started watching you. Thomas waited for the prince to continue. I was trying to understand what real leadership looks like, Prince George explained. I learned that it's not about having power over people. It's about using whatever power you have to help people become their best selves and find their right place in the world. Thomas smiled at the young prince with deep affection and respect. Your Highness, you've already mastered the most important part of leadership. You've learned to see people, to really see them, and to care about their well-being as complete human beings. As Prince George prepared to leave, he turned back one final time. Thomas, I hope that when I'm older and have real responsibilities, I'll remember to always look for the Thomas Mitchells, the people who serve faithfully while carrying their own challenges and dreams. I hope I'll always remember that good leaders help people find where they can flourish. Thomas watched as Prince George's car disappeared down the street, knowing that he had witnessed something remarkable, a 10-year-old boy learning to become not just a future king, but a true leader who understood that power exists to help others reach their potential. That evening, as Thomas helped Emma with her homework and listened to her excited chatter about meeting Prince George, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. Prince George's silent action had been much more than a kind gesture or even a life-changing opportunity. It had been a demonstration of leadership that would influence how Thomas approached his own work with students and families for years to come. More importantly, it had shown both Thomas and Emma that when people in positions of authority choose to really see and understand those who serve them, extraordinary things become possible. Prince George had proven that true nobility comes not from titles or birth, but from the choice to use whatever influence you have to help others flourish. Thomas resigned with respect, but he also left with something more valuable, the knowledge that he had played a part in helping shape a future leader who would carry these lessons forward into a lifetime of service to others.